The war's end brought hope for a better world, but also new divisions. The alliance between the Western democracies and the Soviet Union shattered almost immediately. Winston Churchill warned in 1946 that an iron curtain had descended across Europe. The Cold War had begun, and the world would spend the next 45 years on the brink of nuclear annihilation. Here's what they don't teach. The nuclear arms race was insane by any rational measure. At its peak, the United States and Soviet Union possessed over 60,000 nuclear warheads, enough to destroy human civilization multiple times over. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD, kept the peace through the threat of total annihilation. We survived not because of wisdom, but because of fear. The colonial empires that had dominated the world before the war began to crumble. Britain, France, and other European powers were exhausted and bankrupt. Independence movements in India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Algeria, and across Africa gained momentum. The war had been fought in the name of freedom. Now colonized peoples demanded their own freedom. The imperial age was dying, though not without violence. The Holocaust fundamentally changed how humanity thinks about human rights and genocide. The United Nations, founded in 1945, adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. The Genocide Convention made it an international crime to attempt to destroy national, ethnic, racial, or religious groups. Never again became a rallying cry, though genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur proved that humanity didn't learn the lesson well enough. The establishment of Israel in 1948 created a homeland for Jewish people after the Holocaust, but also displaced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, creating a conflict that continues today. The war's consequences ripple through the present, shaping conflicts we still cannot resolve. But here's the most disturbing legacy. We're forgetting. The last World War II veterans are dying. Soon there will be no one left who remembers what it was actually like. Already, surveys show shocking ignorance. A 2018 study found that 22% of American millennials hadn't heard of the Holocaust or weren't sure they had. In some countries, authoritarian leaders are rewriting history, minimizing atrocities, glorifying nationalism. The technologies developed during the war, nuclear weapons, jet engines, computers, rockets, transformed the modern world. The Manhattan Project's scientists became the fathers of the nuclear age. Von Braun's rockets took us to space. Turing's computers became the foundation of the digital revolution. War accelerated technological progress, but at a terrible moral cost.
November 11th, 1918. After 4 years of hell, the guns finally fell silent across Europe. The First World War had killed 17 million people and wounded 20 million more. Entire generations were wiped out. Europe lay in ruins, and the world breathed a collective sigh of relief. Politicians promised this would be the war to end all wars. But 6 months later, in the glittering Hall of Mirrors at Versailles Palace, the victorious Allies would sign a peace treaty so vindictive and short-sighted that it guaranteed an even more devastating war just 20 years later. The Treaty of Versailles, signed June 28, 1919, wasn't a recipe for peace. It was a blueprint for World War II. This is the story of how the winners of one war planted the seeds of the next, and how revenge, disguised as justice, created the conditions for Adolf Hitler's rise to power.
3 men dominated the Paris Peace Conference. American President Woodrow Wilson, who dreamed of idealistic peace based on self-determination and a League of Nations. French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau, a 77-year-old who had lived through 2 German invasions and wanted revenge, and British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, caught between public demands to squeeze Germany until the pips squeak and private worries about pushing Germany too far. They had completely different visions. Wilson wanted justice. Clemenceau wanted vengeance. Lloyd George wanted Germany weak enough to not threaten Britain, but strong enough to be a buffer against Bolshevik Russia. The result was a compromise that satisfied no one and solved nothing. Here's the first fatal mistake. Germany wasn't invited to negotiate. German delegates arrived in May 1919 expecting to discuss terms. Instead, they were handed a 440-page treaty and given 2 weeks to submit written objections. The Allies would consider their comments but accept no major changes. Germany could sign or face renewed war. But Germany's army no longer existed, and the Allied blockade was starving the country. This wasn't negotiated peace, it was dictated peace, what Germans called a diktat. The treaty's most poisonous provision was Article 231, the War Guilt Clause. It declared that Germany and its allies accepted full responsibility for causing all loss and damage of the war. This wasn't just historical judgment, it was the legal foundation for demanding massive reparations. But this was historically dishonest. Yes, Germany bore significant responsibility for the war, but so did Austria-Hungary, Russia, France, and Britain. The war resulted from a complex web of alliances, imperial ambitions, and miscalculations by all major powers. But the victors needed someone to blame, and Germany became the scapegoat. This single clause poisoned German politics for 2 decades. No German politician could accept this moral condemnation and survive politically. The phrase "war guilt lie" became a rallying cry for German nationalists, including a furious wounded veteran named Adolf Hitler. The territorial losses were severe. Germany lost 13% of its territory and 10% of its population. Alsace-Lorraine went back to France. But worse, the Allies created the Polish Corridor, a strip cutting through Germany to give Poland access to the sea. This separated East Prussia from the rest of Germany, with over 2 million Germans now living under Polish rule. The city of Danzig became a free city under League of Nations control. Millions of Germans suddenly found themselves living in foreign countries. The military restrictions were devastating. Germany's army was limited to 100,000 men, barely enough for police work, with no tanks, no air force, no heavy artillery, and no general staff. The Navy was reduced to a handful of light ships. Submarines were forbidden. Germany was to remain defenseless.
But the most catastrophic provision was financial reparations. In 1921, the bill came. 132 billion gold marks, roughly $442 billion today, about 3 times Germany's entire GDP. It was economically impossible to pay. British economist John Maynard Keynes, who attended the conference, was so horrified he resigned in protest and wrote a devastating critique, The Economic Consequences of the Peace. He predicted the treaty would impoverish Germany, destabilize Europe, and create conditions for future war. He wrote, "If we aim deliberately at the impoverishment of Central Europe, vengeance will not limp." He was exactly right. Germany couldn't pay. When it fell behind in 1923, France occupied the Ruhr industrial region to extract resources by force. German workers went on strike. The government printed money to support them. The result was hyperinflation so catastrophic it destroyed German society. By November 1923, $1 equaled 4.2 trillion marks. People needed wheelbarrows to carry enough cash to buy bread. Life savings evaporated overnight. The middle class, traditionally the stable center of society, was ruined. They felt betrayed by the democratic Weimar Republic that had accepted this treaty. They began looking for alternatives, for strong leaders promising to restore German pride and prosperity.
Here's where a poisonous myth took hold that would have catastrophic consequences: the Dorfstadslegende, the stab-in-the-back legend. Many Germans believed their army hadn't been defeated on the battlefield. When the armistice was signed, German troops still occupied foreign territory. No Allied soldier had set foot in Germany. How had Germany lost? The answer, according to this myth, was betrayal. The army had been stabbed in the back by politicians, socialists, communists, and Jews on the home front. While brave soldiers fought, these traitors undermined the war effort and orchestrated revolution. Germany didn't lose militarily. It was betrayed politically. This was complete fiction. By October 1918, Germany's generals knew the war was lost and demanded the government seek an armistice before total collapse. But the generals cleverly shifted responsibility to civilian politicians. Let the November criminals take the blame for surrender and the humiliating treaty. The army's reputation remained intact while democracy took the fall. This myth destroyed Weimar democracy from within. The government that signed Versailles was forever tainted as treasonous. Political assassinations became routine. Matthias Erzberger, who signed the armistice, murdered 1921. Walther Rathenau, foreign minister, murdered 1922. Right-wing paramilitaries hunted traitors. Adolf Hitler found his political voice attacking the November criminals and the Versailles Diktat. He promised to tear up the treaty, restore German honor, rebuild the military, and make Germany great again. For millions of humiliated, impoverished Germans, this message was intoxicating.
When Hitler invaded Poland in September 1939, World War II began. Versailles didn't cause the war. Hitler's evil did that. But the treaty created conditions that allowed him to rise and gave him grievances to exploit. The treaty made three fatal mistakes. It humiliated Germany without weakening it, imposed impossible economic burdens that created desperation, and proclaimed self-determination while denying it to millions of Germans. After World War II, the Allies learned these lessons. Instead of revenge, America launched the Marshall Plan to rebuild former enemies. Germany and Japan became prosperous democracies. The result? Lasting peace. The lesson is clear. Peace built on vengeance is no peace at all. The men who wrote Versailles in 1919 believed they were securing peace. Instead, they created a 20-year pause before a war that killed 70 million people. Win the war but lose the peace, and you've won nothing. The Treaty of Versailles proves it.